Welcome to Downtown Sports. My name is Downtown Steven Brown, and in today's video, guys, there's sort of some loose news that has happened around the league that we can sort of relate back to the Toronto Maple Leafs, because that's the name of the game, right? Whenever something happens, you have to ask the question, how does it affect the Toronto Maple Leafs? And then a little bit later on in the video, we can play Mythbusters and talk about a rumor surrounding the team and kind of ask the question, does it make sense? Do you guys even want it? See how it fits in. So about a week ago, Colton Parayko signed a 8-year, $6.5 million per season extension with the St. Louis Blues. And of course, you have to ask the question, like I said, how does that affect the Toronto Maple Leafs in their standing or their negotiations with Morgan Rielly? Maybe Colton Parayko may not be the defenseman that he once was with the St. Louis Blues when they won the Stanley Cup a couple of seasons ago, but he still does have that pedigree, and I'm not going to blame him for having 2 down seasons the last 2 years, because it's been a bit crazy, right? Maybe he does bounce back this season, and I do still see him being a fairly comparable player to Morgan Rielly. When discussing Morgan Rielly's next contract, the go-to comparable used to be Torrey Krug's contract that he signed in October of 2020 for $6.5 million a season and 7 years. If you're looking at just the raw point totals from defensemen from the 17-18 season until last year, Torrey Krug, Morgan Rielly sit 7th and 9th on this list and are only separated by about 7 points. If we're taking a look at some more advanced metrics in terms of expected goals above replacement over the last 4 seasons on evolvinghockey.com here, you'd see that maybe the comparison between Morgan Rielly and Colton Parayko, while albeit they're 2 different players, Parayko may be a little bit more defensively minded than what Morgan Rielly is, their overall value to their teams has been fairly comparable. But time is undefeated and sample sizes can sometimes be selective. And if we're looking at the data from just this season, the St. Louis Blues weren't that great of a team. And maybe that has to do with guys like Colton Parayko and Torrey Krug maybe struggling. It's no secret, Morgan Rielly's not that great at defending. But then again, it doesn't help that the Maple Leafs use him against the other team's best players. It's just what it is. But at the same time, he's very good at moving the puck, and he does that more than any other Maple Leafs defenseman, and he does that against the other team's best players, and you cannot undervalue his contribution to the team. And we haven't really gotten an update to this bit of information on Morgan Rielly since about the end of June, early July, when Pierre LeBrun said that the Leafs were kind of waiting until the fireworks died down and the later part of the offseason to decide what they wanted to do with him, if they were going to trade him, if they were going to re-sign him, and we're in September right now, and maybe no news is good news on that front if you're hoping that they can get an extension worked out, because if they were going the route of trading him, you probably would have heard something by now. And the article did say that Morgan Rielly likes being a Maple Leaf and he would take less to remain one, but you can look at Colton Parayko's new contract one of 2 ways. One, you could say that his contract is a hard comparable for Morgan Rielly, or if you're part of Morgan Rielly's camp, you could say that, well, now that Parayko signed his contract, there's one less defenseman available July the 1st, and supply and demand, right? Now my client is worth more money. If you're looking at the amount of money the defensemen have been handed out this offseason, and you're still worried about Morgan Rielly's potential next deal or what they can do with him, because we've discussed all of those options at length in other videos, and I will leave the most recent one linked above the screen, I don't think that we have to worry about Morgan Rielly using Seth Jones or Darnell Nurse as comparables in his contract negotiations, because they're just not the same type of players. They have different roles on their teams, and they're not perceived in the same light by general managers around the league. So then if you're comparing Morgan Rielly to another offensive defenseman in Dougie Hamilton, I think that Hamilton is not as much of a defensive liability as Morgan Rielly is, and Dougie Hamilton can really shoot the puck. So I think that as an overall defenseman, that puts him ahead of Morgan Rielly, and as an offensive defenseman, it puts him in a whole nother tier above him. And then I guess the next thing that we can talk about here is not necessarily about Jack Eichel, but the second part of this tweet here. The Maple Leafs plan to keep Ilya Mikheyev in the fold after his trade request? When did he request a trade? According to several sources, Toronto winger Ilya Mikheyev asked for a trade following the 2020-21 season. But what is important to the story is that the Maple Leafs made it clear they do not want to accommodate this request. At issue appears to be role and ice time heading into the final year of his contract, which is seeing him be paid $1.645 million. He signed it a couple of seasons ago. It was a 2-year deal. His 14-13 per game last season was 8th among Toronto forwards. On the screen right now, you're seeing scoring chances for per 60, minimum 100 minutes played at 5-on-5 from this past season, and Ilya Mikheyev ranked 75th among forwards in the NHL last year. And in terms of Maple Leaf forwards last season, he spent the 5th highest percentage of his ice time against elite competition, playing against the other teams' better players, and relative to the rest of the Maple Leaf forwards, he was actually fairly decent in terms of both the shot attempt share and the quality of those chances. And if we're looking at who his most common line mates were, again, he was used in that shutdown role with guys like Zach Hyman, Pierre Engvall, and Alex Kerfoot. But he also spent a considerable amount of ice time playing with guys like John Tavares and William Nylander, who he found success with in his rookie year. I believe he had 23 points in 39 games. People were really excited about this player before he suffered that really unfortunate injury where a skate kind of came up and unfortunately caught him in an area where he didn't have a lot of padding or protection. And he was also second among Maple Leaf forwards in shorthanded time on ice, and he was fairly efficient on the penalty kill this past season. And I show all the stats and I say all this instead of just giving a general scouting report and saying that, yeah, he generates a ton of chances. Do you not watch the game? But those chances don't go in. They don't get buried. A lot of the times they end up with him either just shoveling the puck into the goalie's pads or shooting it right into his chest. He just doesn't have the hands or the shot to finish to be considered a top 6 forward. And with him already being 8th in terms of overall ice time among Maple Leaf forwards last season with 14 minutes and 13 seconds a night, I don't know if you can really justify playing him more. And if we're looking at what the Maple Leafs' lines could possibly look like moving into next season, and if I haven't already mentioned it, the video that I did on that with all the explanations and stats and in-depth analysis will be linked above the screen or at the end of the video. I can't see him getting more offensive opportunities over guys like Nick Ritchie, Alex Kerfoot, or even Michael Bunting on that left side. And the same on the right side. I'm not seeing him getting more offensive opportunities over guys like Mitch Marner, William Nylander, Jason Spezza, or even Andre Kasha, who, if he's healthy and put in an offensive situation, that guy's a former 20-goal scorer. Ilya Mikheyev's role on this team is no disrespect to him. He's a useful player, playing, I think, the role that he should be playing, a role that he's really good at. And maybe if this player does get a little bit more puck luck rolling his way and is able to shoot higher than 6.5%, and he is able to figure out how to bury some of those opportunities that he does get, maybe you could justify putting him in the top 6 back with Tavares and Nylander long term. But at the same time, I would rather go out and acquire someone else to play there than have to rely on him playing there consistently. Now, I know better and you know better, and I don't put much stock unless it comes from one of the main insiders, like an Elliot Friedman or Chris Johnson, Frank Serafali, like along those lines, Pierre LeBrun, Bob McKenzie, those kind of guys. But it's September the 8th and I'm bored, and let's talk. Does this make sense? PK didn't have that bad of a year last year with the Devils, but at the same time, if you're acquiring him, it's because he's got some gas left in the tank on the power play with his shot. And I'm not too sure how helpful looking at his numbers on the Devils' power play is, because the Devils have not been good the last couple of years, but they did add a lot this offseason, Dougie Hamilton being one of those guys. Maybe this is a trade that makes more sense later on towards the deadline. If the Devils don't find themselves in the playoff picture, maybe they look to offload a guy like PK. But then again, he is in the last year of a deal that's seeing him be paid $9 million. So there would need to be quite a bit of salary retention there to make sense. And at that point, that can get costly. As we saw, the Maple Leafs, I believe, needed to chip in a fourth for the San Jose Sharks to retain an extra 50% on a guy like Nick Foligno, and that can really add up, especially when you're trying to acquire multiple pieces at the deadline. Now, I'm going to give PK a fair shake here. The Devils last year were using him like he was 25 and in Montreal and contending for Norris trophies. Last season, spending a large portion of his ice time, more so than any other defenseman aside from Kulikov playing against elite competition. And that's just not what PK is at this point in his career. You have to adjust your expectations here, and that's not the type of player that the Maple Leafs would be using him as anyway. That's more so Jake Muzzin, that's more so TJ Brody. But at the same time, relative to the rest of his teammates, not the greatest in terms of the shot attempt share and not the greatest in terms of the actual quality of the chances allowed. But against the middle of the lineup type competition, PK really tore it up in terms of the shot attempt share, in terms of the quality of those chances, just by looking at the numbers and especially relative to the rest of his teammates. And that's more the role, that's more the speed where I think PK is at this point in his career. Obviously, if you're bringing in another defenseman, you need to bump one of them out. And you have guys like Travis Dermott and Timothy Liljegren there. And if Dermott is going to play the way that he did the first half of last season or the majority of last season, I'm not really too interested. I would be okay in moving him out. That's a roster spot and some money that can be put towards someone who can help this team, especially a guy like PK, who we showed would be able to fill a lesser role like that and do it in a big way. But at the same time, if Travis Dermott is not your guy, how do you justify bringing in someone else without giving Liljegren the chance, right? He's a young player who the Maple Leafs have developed very carefully and they've taken their time with, right? He was a rookie in the American Hockey League when they won the Calder Cup. They've groomed him to kill penalties, which is what he was doing in the couple of games that he got into with the Leafs last season. And how do you justify bringing in another guy without giving him an opportunity? That's not how you develop players. But I think those questions can only be answered with more questions at this point, and we're going to have to just wait and see. If guys like Dermott can be what you need, then you don't need PK. If Liljegren can be what Dermott can't be, then you don't need PK. If Rasmus Sandin fills that role on power play 1, then maybe you don't need PK, unless you determine that PK's having a really good season, the Devils aren't in playoff contention, you can find a partner to get that double salary retained in there, and maybe the Maple Leafs play with 3 forwards and 2 defensemen on one pairing, right? Because PK can really shoot the puck, and that's something that is valuable. But it also would depend on what the team's needs would be at that time, and that's something that we can't really answer until we get closer to that date. And I tried looking up when the trade deadline is going to be, and I couldn't find anything. I couldn't find a concrete date other than this tweet from David Pagnotta that says that the trade deadline is usually about 40 days before the end of the regular season. And the end of the regular season this year, because of the Olympics and the All-Star break, because they want to do both because they're nuts, is not going to be until April 29th, which would slate it around March 21st. And the reason why that's important is because if you figure out the start date of the season, the end of the season, and when the trade deadline is, you can figure out how much money is going to be owed to players at the deadline when you acquire them, and then you can budget how much cap space you would need to make certain hypothetical moves. So if the start of the season is on October 12th and the end of the season is on April 29th and the trade deadline is hypothetically on March the 21st, the season would be 199 days long. And at that point on March the 21st, you don't need 100% of $9 million. You need just less than 20% of it. And then you factor in 50% salary retention and double salary retention. You don't need that much, but at the same time, it's still going to be a lot in terms of deadline space, and the Maple Leafs may not have very much to start with. So is PK going to be your main acquisition at the deadline? Is it going to be your only acquisition then? Can they afford to do that? I don't know. It depends on what their needs are. But if he can still shoot the puck, yeah, he would be someone that I would be interested in to play on the Maple Leafs' second or third pairing. Over the next 2 or 3 weeks, the preseason is going to be starting up, the regular season is going to be starting up, and we'll have some more relevant news and stuff like that to talk about, of course. And I just started school back up on Tuesday, and if you did, then good luck to you. If you have kids or grandkids there, good luck to them. Hopefully we're going to be getting some hockey news fairly soon, because it would be nice to get back to talking to you guys a little bit more often. So, as always, make sure to like the video if you did like and subscribe for more, because more is always on the way. And guys, remember, we're starting back up again pretty soon.